Thanks everyone for joining and welcome to our webinar today, which is called Leveraging SoapUI and Testkube to Test Your APIs under Kubernetes. So this is kind of a joint webinar between SmartBear and Kubeshop. And just before we get going, just a little bit of housekeeping. So this session is being recorded. A link to the on-demand video will be shared with all registrants in the next couple of days. If you do have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we'll get to as many questions at the end of the session as possible. There will be a couple of polls dotted throughout the webinar just to get some engagement for you and to capture some of your insights. So I would encourage you to participate in those as they come along. So what we will be covering today is just a very brief overview of SmartBear and what we do, a brief overview of Kubeshop and what Kubeshop is all about. We'll take a quick look at the API and microservices landscape just to set the scene a little bit for regards to some of the challenges that are out there with regards to API quality. We'll be taking a little bit more of an in-depth look at testing challenges specifically to APIs and microservices within Kubernetes. And then hopefully we'll showcase to you the benefits of combining the power of SoapUI and Testkube to allow you to have successful testing of APIs within Kubernetes itself. And then we'll be delighted to give a live demo, and my co-speaker, Bruno, who I will introduce just now, will showcase some of the work that Testkube have done to build a plugin between Testkube and SoapUI. So my name is Frank Kilcommins. I'm an API Technical Evangelist here at SmartBear, and I'm delighted to be joined by Bruno Lopes, who is a product manager at Kubeshop. So you're very welcome, Bruno.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank.
So we'll launch a first poll now just to make sure everyone is awake and with us. So we'll leave that up for a moment, and you can fill that out at your own leisure. We just have it on the screen here as well for the benefit of our on-demand viewers so that they can see the poll question that was asked. So a little background to SmartBear. SmartBear is a global company. We're headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, and we have 14 global office locations. Currently, we have more than 32,000 customers and over 16 million active users of our products. And for more than a decade, SmartBear has been delivering high-quality products and providing world-class customer support. Taking a very brief look at our product portfolio, SmartBear works right across the software development lifecycle, from BDD to design, test and test management, code review capabilities, all the way up to integrations and optimizations for continuous integration and continuous deployment, as well as monitoring and app stability capabilities. And all of this is to ensure that our customers can deliver high quality software faster. And now I'd like to hand over to Bruno to give you an introduction into Kubeshop.
Great, thank you. So Kubeshop is a company that I work for. It's an incubator that is trying out these awesome new projects in the Kubernetes space, where the focus of those tools are for developers, for testing, and basically to help the people that use Kubernetes. We have 6 projects right now. We have Monocle, Testkube, Kusk, like all these tools that are used just to, for example, Monocle is for Kubernetes configuration and to help you deploy your resources. The one that I'm currently leading is the Kubernetes native testing framework, which we are going to talk in a bit. And we have a lot more that you can also watch later.
That's great. Thanks very much, Bruno, for the overview. So I think it's always good just to set a little bit of the context as to what's happening in the wider kind of API world and microservices landscape around us. And of course, you know, everyone has heard about microservices. They really are everywhere. And I think everyone on the webinar today will have experienced the growth of APIs and microservices over the last number of years. And I think it's worth just showing that it is coming back to us year on year as part of the industry reports that we run at SmartBear, that microservices really are the leading driver for the continued API growth that's happening within organizations and also between organizations and their customers. So they really have left the threat of disillusionment. And as we're all kind of continuing to shift from monolithic architectures to more consumable architectures or capability-focused architectures. And that's, of course, where microservices are well suited. They help us to unlock the value that's hidden or hard to reach within internal systems and promotes the reusability of bespoke capabilities right across the landscape. And I think it's always important, as you are kind of shifting your architecture approach from traditional monolithic structures more into a microservices-based approach, that you also reframe your testing. So you also need to improve your testing strategy with regards to microservices. And as you're dealing with the larger number of APIs across your company or organization, this can put additional strain and pressure on delivery cycles. And the deadline pressures that are experienced often shrink the most prized asset that we all have, and that's our time. So when we have this pressure on deadlines, it can mean we start to cut corners or perhaps don't pay enough attention to the quality of the APIs that we're delivering. And this can have many impacts for an organization. First and foremost, it means you spend more time fixing issues and you have less time to actually focus on adding new value and new features into your services themselves. It can also cause you to miss deadlines or break SLAs that you have with your customers or other parts of the organization. Even looking at it then, when you expose some of these things outside the walls of your organization, it can mean you can experience some brand or reputational damage in the marketplace. And worst case, you can even lose customers. And all of this is coming back to us in our surveys that we run across the API landscape. And what we've seen is that teams who take the time to focus on API quality and bake that into their delivery process continuously, they can then benefit from that in future iterations, and they can focus on delivering value because they have the processes set up to make sure that quality is a continuous part of their cycle. So the tools that we're kind of going to showcase to you today that can help you keep a quality focused approach to your delivery. And again, having a quality focused approach doesn't mean that you have to have an expensive outlay. So the tools that we will be demonstrating here are open source capabilities that allow you to bring quality into your cycles, and then you can determine if you need to scale beyond that. And the first one is, of course, SoapUI. So SoapUI is an open source automation testing tool, originally built back in 2005, focused around SOAP services. Then it started to broaden its scope to support REST. And then, of course, it's moved on to other JMS type protocols, queuing protocols, and GraphQL as well. We have currently more than 10 million downloads for SoapUI, and it is still one of the best known tools out there for REST and SOAP-based functional security and performance testing. If you hit the limitations,
it's very old. Yeah, like when I was in college, I was still learning how to code, and I was already learning SoapUI and doing tests with it.
Yeah, I think
it's very experienced tool.
It's a nice way because it obviously caters to what developers can need to get the work that you're doing done, but it also means that you don't need to have access to the code to leverage it. So you can come in, you don't necessarily need coding experience, you have the ability to have a low code approach to building out your tests without even writing code or scripts. So it means it suits a wide demographic of folks who want to get up and running with testing different flavors of APIs. Of course, we have another offering as well, Ready API, which is the more enterprise grade version. So if you hit the limits of what SoapUI can do, you don't have to be blocked. You can always look to move on and get wider assertion capabilities, wider protocol support, and richer virtualization capabilities, but that's for another day. So we've talked about some of the testing in general with regards to APIs and microservices, but I think if you're delivering microservices into a Kubernetes environment, you're also going to experience some additional challenges. So maybe Bruno, you could fill us in on some of those challenges that you've experienced.
Of course, and I wanted to also add to a previous slide that you had around that graphic where people set the risks of not testing. It's very interesting that they said missing deadline. So there's a lot of misconception that they lose time by not testing, which is on the long run is not true. Like you can on the short term in a week, you can just release something, don't test it, and that might give you like a few days. In the long run, if you don't create tests and you don't automate them, you'll begin to basically accumulate issues that are going to appear, and they are going to be like their number will increase and they'll appear more often. And basically, at some point in time, you'll basically spend a lot of effort just figuring out where are those issues, fixing them, because they appear later on, either by reports from the users or things that you basically discovered. So you will lose time by not testing. You don't lose time by testing. So that's a good takeaway from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I felt the pain on skipping testing as well. So yes, it might help you in one iteration, but it does come back quite quickly to cause you problems.
Yeah, exactly. And with this, there are some challenges in testing in Kubernetes. So starting from like the first one that might be obvious in very big corporates is restricted access to testing environments. It happens especially in big corporates where the access to the environments is not given away for everyone. You might develop code and deploy to environments to which you don't have access to, especially in businesses where the data in those environments are very sensitive, or the code is sensitive. There's a lot of pieces together, so you cannot risk giving access to everyone. So that's a challenge that happens often, where you need to test it, but okay, now I need access, or need to talk with administrator to give me access to a firewall or permissions. So that's one challenge. The other one is that it's hard when you are doing a lot of tests and you're putting them on your CI/CD. There's some challenges when it comes to debugging, especially when they are running in those environments. When you're running something on your machine, you can basically put your debugger, you can do a lot of things, but when they are running in the cluster, they are running somewhere, and you just can only see the logs, and your assets. Sometimes it's not so easy to basically get all that information. So that's also a challenge. And also to see all your testing activity, you might want to have a view of the whole state of the cluster, not just your test. So imagine that one thing in particular fails in your cluster. When that fails, it helps you also to understand why it failed. If you also have a picture of the whole thing, if there are more tests, it's just that one. Are there more tests failing? Which ones? What are the logs of those tests? So that's some complications on that side. The other one is storing and visualizing test artifacts. For example, there are tools for to name subreddits, for example, that test UI and produce videos. I'm not sure if SoapUI produces videos, but if it does, it's the same problem. Is you need a way where the test runs in Kubernetes, that video gets taken out of Kubernetes, saved somewhere, and you can visualize it. So you can basically see what happened in that test. And that's also a challenge. If you do that in a CI/CD, it's not very straightforward to handle that. And the last point here is that CI/CD pipelines can become very complex. In a normal flow, you have the build step, which is the first one. You are building your application. You might have some static code analysis, some linters, some things that you add to your CI/CD, and then at some point you deploy to an environment in Kubernetes. And then is the place where you want to test. You might want to use SoapUI, for example, to call your SOAP interfaces or REST interfaces or whatever you want to test. And those things you want to automate, and you want to add a lot of steps and tests that you might want to do. Those things, if you do those things in the CI/CD pipeline, you'll need to containerize your tests. So basically building Docker containers. You are going to do scripts for those, and it's adding the flow and configuring your pipeline adds complexity, and your pipelines will grow in size. They'll become a huge monolith, and they are actually not made for testing. Right? Testing is something that you do as part of that flow, but it's not their focus. So those are basically the main challenges of testing in the cloud, basically.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we covered in a separate session that we had with Kubeshop is, again, trying to make sure you can build repeatability and kind of observability into that process. So you will be spinning up all of these environments, then you will be deploying to these environments, and then you will be testing these environments. So making sure that you can also have a mechanism to get some of the operational metadata as to how those environments should behave consistently and inject it at the right time in the process is also crucial to making sure that you can have repeatability in your tests as well.
Yeah, exactly. So
Testkube.
Exactly. We now talk about the challenges, and so that's what, all of these challenges was the reason that Testkube was built for. It's basically tackling this test automation challenge in a Kubernetes native way. It's like a, how do you say? It's a fact that the testing tools that are made, all of them are not made for Kubernetes. They are made to test APIs, right? For example, SoapUI, it's made to test interfaces, API interfaces, be it SOAP, REST, and many other protocols. And it does it very well. But it's not a Swiss knife where it solves all of your problems, right? It's just made for testing. So after that, there's the challenge of, okay, how can I automate my tests that I just produced? And most of the testing tools are not built and made with that in mind, with that automation part that is on later on after you create your tests. So and exactly that's where Testkube come in. It automates all of your execution of your tests. Doesn't matter which framework it is. Can be SoapUI or can be any other tool that you might use. For example, we support Key6 that also does load testing, Cypress, as I mentioned. We have support for Java-based projects as well. Anything that we have users that use REST assured, Ginkgo for Golang, and there's many. And the community is very nice that they are contributing these executors so that other members of the community can use them, and that's really nice to see.
It's great.
And and the other thing that Testkube really focus on solving for the users is that simplifies your CI/CD pipelines. Is that instead of you worrying about how to configure our CI/CD systems with containers, scripts, boilerplate code, and make a very big flow, we say, don't do that. Just define your tests in Kubernetes as CRDs. So they become Kubernetes resources, and basically your CI/CD pipelines will become very clean. They only have logic, but they'll not have a lot of steps that are not related with logic, and they are just cumbersome to do. So that's the thing we try to do, is like simplifying all these processes. And at the end, after this automation, as you were saying, Frank, it's very nice to have observability into your cluster, and also the environment to see, is my environment working? Are the tests passing? What's happening there? So we basically put everything in one place, in one centralized place, where you can see all of your tests, if they are passing, if they are failing, and basically the history of their execution. So we have a single pane of glass where you can see the whole state and how everything is running.
That's nice. And you get to see that across all of the environments that you may have as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. That's great.
So this is an example I was mentioning about improves the CI/CDs. So on the left, you have different steps where you build, you deploy your code, your applications into a cluster. You see here, I'm not sure, no, I cannot, but so you have the application and you have different steps. API tests, you can have different ones. You can have UI, you can have load tests, you can have all of the tests that you want to do. So you can realize that the more tests you add and more flows you think you have in your CI/CD, the more complex that will be. So that's why it's very helpful if you remove that complexity and those scripts from your CI/CD and use a framework that does this for you. So in the example on the right with Testkube is something that lives in your cluster. It handles all of the execution of your tests there. Basically, they are scheduled as jobs, and then Testkube is looking for them. And so that allows you to focus really on the only thing that you should focus on is the logic, is which test do I want to see in a step that's run. And you make these decisions based on if those tests are passing or failing. And you don't need to worry about any of the complicated setup.
And the setup of Testkube within the cluster then, is that done at deploy time?
Yeah, you can deploy Testkube using Elm, and it lives in your cluster. And when you want to add more tests, you just define them as CRDs. So it's basically a YAML that's it's defined there. Or you can use the CLI. Testkube CLI can create the CRDs for you. So in one command, you can just deploy tests to your cluster.
Very nice. Okay, that's great. It definitely looks simpler from a CI/CD perspective. You can just focus on running the test suite. You don't have to get caught up too much as to the separate things that are happening there, and then deal with the results.
Exactly.
Which is good. So that works kind of similarly with regards to SoapUI as well, where you can do that. But again, that means that you have explicit access to the place where the API is living. And I guess for anyone that's here, the difference here is that that's not intrinsically possible when it's behind maybe an ingress controller within Kubernetes, and you want to make sure that you can run the test suite without having to worry about all of the access challenges. Okay, I think we have another poll coming up.
Cool. Oh, it's sad we cannot vote.
There we go. Very good. So we'll just leave that up there for a few moments. And myself and Bruno will move along, but you can take your time to fill that out at your leisure. So what we're moving on to now is, I suppose, the power of these two things combined, Bruno. So maybe you can tell us what that means, what benefits that will bring.
So what Testkube does well is basically takes all the capabilities of the testing tool. In this case, it's SoapUI. And because SoapUI is really good at doing functional testing, load testing, the security testing, and a lot of all the capabilities that it has, can bring them to your cluster and automate them for you in just one single command. It's very structured, very repeatable. It's very GitOps friendly. You can define your tests in your repository as YAMLs, and you can use tools like Argo CD if you want to follow that approach, where it's just then deploys your test to your cluster, and basically Testkube takes that automation from you. That's
great. So you let let's say the testing tool itself worry about the specifics of what it will test, and then Testkube just provides that facilitation to be able to easily import that in to the cluster and have it executing, and then make sure that it happens in a structured way and gives the feedback back to the team exactly like they had access to what they were testing, which I think is very useful indeed.
Yeah, exactly. So the tester should focus only on using SoapUI. You use the UI of SoapUI and you do your tests as you normally do. You save them, for example, in your Git repository, and then you should not worry about how to automate that, how to run them in the cluster. So you should just focus on what's important, which is the tests themselves, not the automation or how they should be run.
Great.
So in this example, it shows how can you use the SoapUI projects in Testkube in your cluster. So what you do is you use it normally. Then SoapUI has something called projects. You save your project.xml. You import it to Testkube, or Testkube fetches it from a GitHub repo. Depends on like how we set it up, and then you can run your tests from there on, and they are defined there in your cluster. You just can click a button, run, and it's always there running it for you.
That's
So I'm going
great.
to show it in a bit in a demo.
Great. So I think we are going to move to a demo. So just so everyone's aware, myself and Bruno have some technical challenges accessing the chat for everyone. So any questions that are there, we will get to them and answer them verbally towards the end.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, Bruno, and hand control over to you for the demo.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Wait, I'm going to share my old screen. Let me see. Okay, I was sharing right now. All right. Can you see SoapUI?
Yes.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a project from scratch. I'm going to create the test suite here, a few test cases, and then we are going to automate and import this to a cluster. And we are going to basically go from creating the test and executing it in a Kubernetes cluster. So as you see here, SoapUI lets you create different projects to test different things. For this example, we are going to test just a simple REST endpoint. So in this example, we can test Testkube's website, testkube.io. And so we have our REST project here. Just going to do a call to see if it's up. And great. So we see that it's up here. So now it's there for our project. And the way SoapUI works is you have test suites and test cases. And a test suite is a collection of different test cases, basically. So I'm going to go here, going to create a new test suite. Let's see, how should we call it? Frank Suite. I'm going to call it Frank Suite. And we have our test suite here. And now I'm going to create a test case. Let's see. What a new test case. 1 second. New test case. So then you can have test case 1, for example. I'm going to click OK. And now we have the first test case. So then now SoapUI lets us decide which type of interface we want. If it's SOAP, if it's REST, if it's a different HTTP, if it's a Java JDBC, so it's a Java database connectivity. In this case, we are going with REST, a simple REST request, and we are going to test, continue to test just the website of testkube.io. So, all right, great. So just try it out. The test case, it's here, but it's still not a test until we do some assertion. So we need to specify, okay, which things do we want to verify? So here on SoapUI, it lets us basically write our test. So which things do you want to see? And for example, for today's demo, we are going to validate that's just a valid HTTP status code. So let's just see if the code returned is just 200, which is the status code for the request worked. And it's here that assertion worked. So if we run it again, we can see here. Okay, it's working. Now, because I don't like tests to pass, I'm going to add a new test case, and let's add a test case that is going to fail. So let's do that now. So 1 second, new test case. This is test case number 2. We can create another REST request here. Just run it to see if it's working all right. Yes, and we are going to do an assertion. And this assertion, we are going to make it so that it fails on purpose. So one of these test cases should always fail. Because in the other test case, we are checking for 200 status code, let's check for 401. So this test will only pass if the status code is 401. Which of course it will not be. So if I run it, it already tells us that it's failed because it's expecting 401 and it got 200. So that's basically our test suite. We have a project in SoapUI to test the Testkube website with 2 test cases, one that is passing, another one that is failing. So now, how do we add this to your cluster? How can you run this in your Kubernetes cluster, for example? So the flow here is you save your project. Is an XML file. We are going to save it here in this folder. Can call it Frank SoapUI. And I'm going to save it. Great. So now that we have the XML, we can use this in Kubernetes in 2 ways using Testkube. You can use using the UI, and you can add basically your tests using the UI or the CLI. For the purpose, I think we can start first with the CLI, so you can see basically how could you add this to your pipeline, and then we can do it also in the more visual-friendly way, which is using the UI. So if you want to do this using the CLI, first you need to create your test. So let me just list the tests here. I have a bunch of things I did before. So let's do. So this is a Testkube CLI. I'm going to just use TK because every programmer likes aliases. So Testkube create test. I'm going to give it a name. You can say Frank Soap. Then we tell the type. So the type is important so that Testkube knows which framework you are trying to test. In this example, we are going to say that it's Soap UI XML. And the file, which is your project, was Frank SoapUI.xml. So it is common. We just define the test here, and we already see it on the UI on the left in this example. Oh, by the way, this is a live environment. So anyone that is attending, if you want to come here and also try it yourself, you can. So now you can run. So I'm going to do Testkube run test. The test is the name is Frank Soap. And what we are going to do is we are going to run the test case 1. So the one that was passing. So it was like test case 1. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was the name. Oh, I need to follow it just to see the logs. Should be ready any second now. Okay, I think I just messed up the comment. 1 second, I'm gonna try it again. So they run and successfully, but because I clicked on a button that just removed the logs. So here we see the test case here that was successful. So now what this did was it took your project, it's running, it's defined into Kubernetes in Testkube, and it's running there. So I can get the test. So I can use kubectl. If you know Kubernetes, it's basically the tool that you use to interact with all of your Kubernetes resources. You can get your test, and it was Frank SoapUI, I think, Frank Soap. So you can see it here. If I do this, I can basically see the YAML that was defined there. So the name is in the namespace Testkube, and this is the content data of your project that is there. So this is let me just change this. This is to run just one test case. Let's now run the other test that was failing. So this was for test case 1, for test case 2. So we are going to run the test case 2, which was looking for the status code 401. So this test now should fail. And we see here that it failed because you were searching for status code. So it was you got 200, and that was not the expected status code exactly for this. And if you just remove this and run it, you basically see that it just runs all of your test suite and all of your test cases that you are defining in your project. So you can make these, you can parallelize. Let's say you have a big project with a lot of test suites. You can define tests that run like only some test suites, other tests that run only all the others, and you can run them at the same time. You can parallelize all of this. So we just run the test suite, which run the test case number 1 and test case number 2, because one of them failed. In the end, it's going to fail, right? Because it's looking for a successful test suite, and all the tests should be run. And yes, so this is how you do using the CLI. If you wanted to do using the UI, you can just come here. You can create a new test. You can just say, SoapUI. You can add labels as well if you want to. And we have a list of labels that already are defined in the cluster. For example, you can define which is the environment or something that helps you filter your tests. And here you basically select the type. So this is all the test types that exist. So for this example, we're going to select SoapUI, and then it's the source. So if this XML, if you save this in a GitHub repo, what you would do is you put here your GitHub repo, like the URL, you put the branch, you put the path. So basically where your SoapUI project exists. So it will be like project.xml in some place, like my test folder. And basically what this does is Testkube will fetch the SoapUI project for you and then run it. For the purpose of this example, we are going to do a simple upload. So I'm just going to go here, and we have, which one was it? Frank SoapUI.
In general, that's good hygiene anyway, to keep your test project living close to your code in the same repo, and it just makes the CI/CD flow much more intuitive.
Yeah, exactly. And so we can run it like a lot of times. And as you remember, we have one test case that fails. So all of these executions should show red as they are running. And you see here, we scheduled 19 executions. So all of these ones are running in parallel. They were scheduled by Kubernetes, and so they are parallelized. If you would do this on a CI/CD system, most of them will basically be blocked, right? If you trigger 19 executions of a test in your pipelines, you know that it will take some time. So in this example, you basically see that's parallelization happening.
Yes, you pay for a lot of agents.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really nice. And then you have the dashboards to basically give you an overview of any test that might be run manually or might be run as part of any CI/CD flow. You get that full oversight as to what tests have been ran, what ones are succeeding, what ones are failing, what type of test projects were run.
Yeah, exactly. So let's add here those flags, those arguments that we had before, and we just save this, and then we can run it now. And now, I mean, it should pass. We are just running the test case number 1. So basically, the UI gives you a way you can visually configure your tests. You can add environment variables. Let's say you can parameterize all of the variables. Let's say the URL changed for Testkube. You could say like my site was, instead of Testkube was Kubeshop.io. You would save this, and then basically your test will see this as an environment variable, can use it, and then run it for you. So you can also do a lot of parameterization here out of the box. And yeah, that's basically it. We have also test suites as well, so you can combine tests. Let me see here an example. This is, as I said, this is a demo cluster. So people are coming here just to try it out and running. So we have a SoapUI test suite here, one test, and you basically can basically do a lot of tests for your cluster. Yeah.
And have you hit any limitations as to different maybe SoapUI project configurations that did not work as expected? This is just me curiously asking a question, because I think this is very interesting to see how, for any testers out there, any teams that are using SoapUI, maybe they're moving more into the cloud native world and using Kubernetes or beginning to use Kubernetes, but just realizing that they don't have to change everything that they're doing from a technology stack perspective. They can continue to use SoapUI for focusing on determining, is the service functioning as we expect it to function, and then pass that over to Testkube, which will take care of making sure that it can execute those tests within the cluster. I'm just wondering, was there any corner cases, any limitations that you've hit so far, or at least maybe on the inverse of that, what do you know absolutely works?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that Testkube schedules these tests is it creates a Docker image with SoapUI installed there as a dependency, and then use the SoapUI binary to run your tests.
Okay,
so
cool.
if you can try it out on your machine with the same binary, and it should work the same way. If you don't need extra dependencies, it should work the same way. So so far we didn't face any issue, because we are just using what is SoapUI supports out of the box. It's just a matter of passing those flags. In case I'm thinking, if there's an external dependency that is not part of SoapUI already, and you try to use a test with that might not work, because the executor only has SoapUI and basically what is needed to run SoapUI tests, and does not have those external dependencies. For those cases, the way this can be tackled is either you ask basically us to add a dependency to executor, just like open an issue on GitHub and say, okay, I want this is not working for this example, and you can just make that request, or you can do it yourself as a user. You can basically take that same image, add dependency, and use the custom executor for yourself. Like it's possible. All of these types of tests that you see here are very customizable. You can basically change anything inside the cluster. You can change basically how many resources are given to the pods. You can add the restrictions around which network connectivity they should have access to. You can tweak everything. So if there's a piece missing, you can just take what the definition that is done, just change whatever you need, and it should work flawlessly.
That's great. Well, that was a really nice demonstration, and it seems very, very simple with regards to being able to take advantage of the work that you already have done within SoapUI. So there isn't a big lift. Basically, nothing needs to change, even from input parameters that you need to send in towards those tests. That all remains the same. The executor respects all of those parameters, etc., and it will just run the project and the inputs that are sent in to the test runner command. So that seems absolutely perfect for making it easy for folks to get up and running, testing these two tools together. So that seems really cool, Bruno. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Frank.
So I think there's another poll to launch, which is great. So we can leave that up there, and we can see if there's any questions that anyone would like to ask. I see we have a couple of questions. Oh, one was about, could you please maximize the SoapUI window? I at least was able to see full screen, Bruno. I'm not sure if anyone else could not see your full screen, but at least I could. So apologies for that. If Julita, if you would like us to demonstrate that project creation again in SoapUI, we can load it back up again and see if we can maximize it. We have some time, so just let us know if you would like us to do that again. And there's a question from Marwan. Is there any limits to the test case numbers in each test suite from an automation perspective?
There's no limits. You can just define your test suites, test cases. Basically, your XML file will become bigger, but we have no limitations on the size of the project, so you can put everything there.
Yeah, and I'm not sure off the top of my head if there is a limit in SoapUI. I can check that out. I haven't experienced it. I've had projects and test suites with 50 or more test cases in there. Generally, there will be a natural limit, I think, where, okay, this makes sense to be within one test case or test suite. Those steps sufficiently test that one specific thing, and then you will start combining those test cases. Often what happens is you will have test cases that might be used across different test suites, and you will think about trying to reuse and share those rather than creating monolithic test suites when there is reuse opportunity across multiple test suites as well. That's also one tactic to try and break down the size, but haven't hit any limits there, and anything that's possible should also be possible from an automation perspective. So if you hit a limit in the UI, chances are you will have even more chance to not hit that limit from an automation perspective. So I hope that answers your question, Marwan. Another question, let me just read it out. I think you confirmed it, but can we combine this to use our existing SoapUI test suites and deploy them along with our microservices and interact with Kubernetes, pods, Helm hooks, etc.? So indeed you can. Yes. So what we're showcasing here is that whatever you have done previously or you're familiar with doing from a SoapUI perspective doesn't need to change. And the benefit here is that Testkube can import that SoapUI project exactly how it would run if it had access to an endpoint on the local network, and it can bring that into the Kubernetes cluster and also execute that exactly like it would without Kubernetes being involved.
Well said.
So I hope that. Thanks, Bruno. And yeah, Julita would like us to just demo the SoapUI project creation again. Bruno, if you could bring up your screen, and we'll make sure we show SoapUI in as big a screen as possible.
So here's the SoapUI project. Let me see if I can. Is there a way to zoom this? Let me check. I don't know. Does anyone know how to amplify the buttons? I'm not sure if I see it any place.
I can see it full screen at least. Julita, do you still have a problem? You can use the chat window and I'll monitor it here. Can you see Bruno's full window? Is there any option you have in Zoom to adjust your settings or your view options?
In preferences? Not sure.
It looks full screen for me at least, Bruno. So we can go through the project creation again, and maybe you can maximize those windows or those mini pop-ups as they come up to you.
Yeah. Well, the window itself is maximized. What I was trying to see if the font could be bigger, but that's hard to do. Does anyone else has the same issue?
I'm not sure. Maybe anyone else could type in the chat to see if they see full screen or not full screen. It would help.
Yeah, but it's maximized. It's full screen now.
Yeah, so maybe just go through the project creation again, and we'll just hope that Julissa can see full screen. So we have some confirmation that people can indeed see full screen. So thanks for responding, folks. Much appreciated.
I can. So in this example, I can. So I just created here on the top left. You see here the rest button. You can click here. You can define basically your REST interface that you are going to test. And it's going to create a new project for you. So here is REST project number 2. After you create your project, what you do is basically the test suites, add the test suites, and here on the left side, you can create a new one. And then after the test suite, you can add your test case. So before we add the tools, just for this example, I'm going to just create one really quickly. And here, still on the right, you can just right-click test case. You can add one test case or more. You can add as many as you like. You see this window here. You can define which type of API you want to test. This example is going to be REST. And this is the flow. So now we have the test case here. You basically just define which things do you want to validate in your test. Is it the status code? There's some scripts you can do, some properties of the response that you might want to check if they are up to code. In this example, I'm just going to see the 200 status code. I'm going to run it, and it will work if it's up. And we just see it that it's up. And
yeah, and there's ways also, like we're not going into too much details on SoapUI right now, but there is also ways to kind of fast track the creation of the test suite. So if you do use OpenAPI to describe your APIs or Swagger definitions to describe your APIs, you can import those files directly. So if you can right click on your project and import the definition, and that will more or less start creating all of the test structures for you based on the endpoints that exist within that definition. So it kind of just fast tracks your creation of your project structure.
Oh, really good. That's very handy.
It's an easy way to make sure you have appropriate coverage over the surface area.